Welcome to this workshop on ongoing school improvement. Thank you for spending part of your day here. Just a couple of housekeeping things. If you need the restroom, out to my left here behind you are restrooms. There are some refreshments on the table. Please help yourself. On the table in front of you, you will find the presentation as it will be presented. Also, some email address or a phone number if you wish to take any and all of this back in a digital form to edit as you see fit to your own schools. Feel free to do that. It's all about helping each other be successful in ongoing school improvement. Finally, at the close of our time together today, which I don't imagine it'll be more than 30 minutes or so, is a reflection report. If you would please fill that out, and if you need to take it with you and fill it out, and you want to just email that back to me after some reflection, I do appreciate that. That will help us be better at helping others with ongoing school improvement. So with respect to your time, instead of standing and presenting, I'm going to sit and discuss as we collaborate on this topic of as equals on ongoing school improvement. So in a 2019 journal in the Educational Administrator, Kobe Myers and Van Groningen said that the basic idea regarding school improvement is for educational leaders like yourself, that we should develop a plan with measurable outcomes that when implemented result in organizational improvements. My suggestion today is that this 6-step model that you're going to consider today and give some feedback on will actually help those of us that are responsible directly for ongoing school improvement in our schools to stay on track. That if we will work this model, we will find success. It is a self-fulfilling model, if you will. It continually it's circular. And if my suggestion is that all of us should follow it, and I think that you'll find it very helpful. Aubrey Malphurs posits correctly that those in leadership must understand the crucial importance of a strategy, of developing a strategy. He is well known for helping not only church leaders but educational leaders develop strategies. But it's Miyake, if I'm pronouncing that name correctly, and Kaplan, who suggests that it's not enough just to focus on the development of a strategy, that we need to focus on the implementation of a strategy. And I think that's the difference between something theoretical and something very practical. And my hope is this is what you'll find it to be very practical. So for our consideration, you will see a model that we're going to walk through 6 steps very quickly. And this model, again, is available to you in a form that you can edit and adapt to your own setting. And I'm sure before this workshop's over or in others, the model itself will be tweaked. So, no further ado, let's begin to talk about the first step. Flowing out of any effective accreditation cycle, which depending on what accrediting agency you have, here we have 6 years, some of them are 5, some of them are 7. We have the whole idea called a self-study. We all know what that's like. We hate those with a passion. But it is an opportunity for us to do a deep dive into what we are doing to see if we are actually just throwing darts in the wind, or is there a target that we're actually hitting? Flowing out of these self-study are what can be called REMOS, and this is an acronym for recommendations, improvements, mandates, objectives, self-identified directives, and suggestions from all of our stakeholders, whether it's a school board, whether it's our faculty, core leadership, families, etc. These represent, of course, as you know, dreams and the aspirations and that the obligations that a school must meet. If we don't meet those, if we ignore those, if we don't even have a model that we're using to implement, mission drift often occurs. I would suggest that a lot of schools, I know at the school that I'm at, years ago, I've been here 17 years, and when we kind of embraced our first self-study and our first reaccreditation, the leadership that was before us didn't leave us anything. It was a very thin little packet like this, and it was really grossly insufficient, and that's putting it kindly. We as leaders better, when we leave a place, leave it better than we found it. And I believe this model, if implemented, anybody can step in and find success. So with that said, I want to begin with the question, is how do we keep these REMOS, these recommendations, these improvements, these mandates, whether they're from the school board, or whether it's the dreams from the parents, feedback from the faculty, or even the directives from an accreditation agency themselves. They'll come in, right, and they'll say, well, these are all nice, but you have to do X, Y, and Z. And we all know, if you've been involved in that credit agencies come in and they're notorious for saying you need to do X, Y, and Z. Little things from putting a camera at the end of a building to making sure that your files in your filing system are color coded. And those are kind of ridiculous, but they expect us to do that. How do we keep up with all of and this is just a very practical thing, how do you, or what is an idea you have to keep up with the REMOS? Just for context, the last self-study we had 57 identified REMOS, and they were these recommendations, improvements, mandates, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What are your thoughts? How do you keep up with them? In my notes it says pause and wait for answer, but there are several programs. Kambachi is one, and goodness, I can't remember the other one right off the top of my head, that I think it's called Basecamp, and it interfaces with Google. One of them is more visual, one of them's like the Pinterest boards, you can pin it, you know, but even if it is an Excel spreadsheet, we have to keep these things in the forefront. And as educational leaders, if we don't, my goodness, some of us can't remember what we had for breakfast last week. How are we going to remember 2 years from now what the recommendations are? So at the very beginning, step one, obviously, is establishing a list of these REMOs that are valuable, not just to our stakeholders, but to the accrediting agency themselves. Thoughts on that? You with me? Make sense? Yeah, okay. Step two, here's where it gets to be interesting, is we want to select 3 to 5 of these REMOs a year. Now, it's not possible to do everything. You can't do everything at once, and so it's prudent to take 3 to 5 of these. You know, if an accreditation period is 6 years, you take 3 to 5 of these, and you can't work on everything. You know, if someone says, well, we want to build a brand new pool and start a swim team, well, that probably not going to happen real soon, but we could do some other things. So we got to select 3 to 5, and the head of school who has charge of keeping up with these REMOs, right, this list, that's his mandate, that's his responsibility. His core team gets together and says, okay, where do we begin? And there's 2 things that we should consider. One, I would suggest we decide on what goes to focus on with any given year. This year, we're gonna focus on these 3 or these 4, these 5 things. Instead of we're just being tossed to and fro by the wind. You and I know that it's usually the cries of the urgent gets all of our attention, and that can derail us. As educators, the student that's acting up in class can rob us from the intended goal for that class period. And as administrators, the unhappy parent or parents talking in the parking lot can get us derailed from things that we need to accomplish. The second thing we need to do is be willing to remain pliable. At my school, the unforeseen took place when our beloved founding pastor and founder of our school passed away. That was right in the middle of our accreditation period, reaccreditation period. And then when you throw on top of that COVID, I mean, goodness, globally, we were all faced with being pliable. Just because we had these 2 or 3 goals, I would dare say that any of us at any of our schools were able to keep track on those. I think everything was pushed to the side and a new set of goals was established. But so number 1, be willing to be pliable when the unforeseen occurs, but also we got to decide on what goals. How do we make that decision? I don't know how you make that decision. Is it by committee? Is it one person running the show? Is it the dog that barks the loudest gets the bone? Frank Canador at Concord Academy came up with this grid that you see in front of you in terms of making decisions. And he asks questions. Is it progressive, which denotes action and forward thinking and innovation and a change? We can't just do everything the same old way. He asks, is it sustainable? Can it be maintained? Is it going to be too worker intensive? Is it going to deplete all of our resources, just this one area? Is it attainable? Is it realistic? Can we build the pool in 1 year? Raise the funds and build it and establish a swim team? Is it practical? This addresses the actual doing or implementing of something. It moves beyond theory. Those of us that are in the trenches, we know we need something that's going to work, not something that we just sit around and talk about. Specific. Is it clearly defined, identified? I mean, how do we know what goal, right, that we're shooting for? If we can't identify it, we probably not gonna hit it. Is it measurable? How do we know if we achieve it? What is it that's going to be noticed? How do we know it's going to be achieved? Is it wise? Experience, knowledge, and good judgment. Timing considerations should come into play. And then, of course, as he always says, is it us? No 2 schools are alike. Your school is not the same as mine. Even in one school, an elementary school is not the same as the middle, and the middle is not the same as high, and the daycare is not the same. We're different, but we can still fall under one umbrella. But no 2 schools are alike. Is it us? Each school has a particular culture. Is there any of these questions here that speaks to you, that you have a comment about? Do you see the wisdom in kind of thinking through this grid? Is it progressive? Is it wise? Is it obtainable? I'm afraid sometimes we go into plans, and I don't know about you, but I'm more of an emotional person. And if I eat a bad chili dog, everything's rough. And then sometimes I get so excited because I had a little too much caffeine, and I'm ready to jump into the deep end. And probably both of those scenarios are somewhere in the middle is probably safe. What are your thoughts? Any particular comments? How do you guys do it?
I think the grid of measurable is something that a lot of people miss. It's difficult when you're thinking about big picture goals sometimes to pin down an aspect of that big picture that is something you can quantify. And so that's a critical part of this grid for any school, because if you can't measure whether you hit it, it's kind of pointless to try to hit something at all.
Yeah.
And so thinking creatively that direction is a huge part of selecting these goals and mandates every year, because if you pick a goal that says, well, we have to do better,
Yeah.
you can't measure that.
Right.
Better is never something you get to, but if you say, we want to color code those files, you can tell if you did that or not at the end of the year. And so that's critical. I think wise is something that a lot of people will struggle with too, because wisdom is not a human characteristic. And so that you have to have some kind of standard to measure wisdom against. And so without that, it gets difficult to apply that to every grid, but certainly that measurable one is a really, really useful one.
Well, that's a great lead in to actually the next step, and that is establishing the game plan. I mean, that is absolutely a great lead into it. And this step 3 involves 3 components. First, the head of school and his core team meet with the purpose of really forward thinking. And again, the idea of base camp and Kambachi storing 57. I mean, I was involved with a school that ended up had over 100 REMOS one year. They weren't called REMOS then, but for the sake of our discussion, REMOS had over 100. And you weren't, no way you're going to remember all of this, particularly if you have 6 or 8, 10, or even 12 standards and then all these substandards. Where do you put all of that? And so something like Kambachi or Basecamp helps with the visual presentation. I'll call it just the storage of valuable information, right? Self-study takes a long time, many hours, and to not keep that, the integrity of that is foolish. But the second thing is understanding what needs to be done is only part of the process. The next question, which really goes to this idea of measurable, and that is who is responsible for this task or that task. I think sometimes when we don't put people, point people to it, accountability is kind of lost, because we can't go back to that person, and say, hey, what's happened here, what's wrong, how you need help, what are the roadblocks. The goal is not to crucify the person. The goal is to say, hey, how can we get this done, and what help do you need? And then of course, finally, is establish a timeline to say not only what we need done, the action steps to get it done, the person or people responsible for getting it done, but when do they need to get it done by? And that's just really establishing the game plan. And I think, or at least in my experience, it may be different in yours, this is where a lot of the best laid plans kind of just crash and burn, because there's no picture, there's no target being painted. Thoughts on that? Do you agree, disagree that this is one of the areas that we kind of say, yay, let's do all these things, and we may say, okay, we've narrowed it to 5, but then it kind of stops there. There's not follow through. There's no real short-term game plan.
So at my institution, we do a lot of this through committee work. And I think when the committee is not intact with what the central mission is or what's trying to be accomplished from the goal, then things get set aside, or like at our institution, we were trying to develop core educational requirements, and it took 4 years, 4 different committees, and only one person consistently went forward with the committee for those 4 years.
Wow.
So each year,
Wow.
the mission had to almost be reestablished to determine, is this a solid game plan? Because people have ideas, obviously, that they want to bring to the table, but it's the walking out of it, the the shoe leather that you're gonna put on it
Right.
to move forward. And the ideas are nothing without, as you're saying here, the game plan.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Any other thoughts? I think that is crucial. You know, I would go so far as to say that it's the leader's responsibility to cast the vision and to get buy-in, to have a culture, to establish a culture where people have the buy-in. One of the things that I appreciated from Frank Canador's list is he ends it with, "Is this us?" There's obviously a link back to, is this who we are? Is this our mission? Is this, do we see ourselves doing this? And sometimes we might get through a lot of this, and at the end of the day, this is just not us. You know, just for transparency, there was a time that my school leader wanted to know us to study the idea of going to becoming a charter school instead of the private Christian school that we are. And at the end of the day, it just wasn't us. Our mission, who we are, we just felt like we couldn't take that one step because we would lose what we value is our identity. And so, yeah, the point is well taken. The next step is what I find to be the hardest step. As you see there in front of you, is not only are we going to establish a list of REMOs, and step 2, select 3 to 5 REMOs each year to work on, and then establish a game plan, timelines, what we're gonna do, who's gonna do it. Step 4 is establishing a communication plan. During a self-study where we're involved, whether it's committees, whether it's certain groups, communication seems to be peak. But then, if we're not careful, this may not be true for you, but my experience has been, if we're not careful, silence breeds uncertainty, at times disillusionment, where communication can actually nurture and keep the motivational ball, if you will, rolling, and can encourage. And the suggestion here in this model that I'm presenting, you can do it in 2 ways. One is with a monthly or quarterly faculty update. That can be done in your setting. If you have like an all-school meeting, the school head or a designee can present, whether it's even in a little video clip or even in just a simple update, because it's only 3 to 5 REMOs that we're working on each year, right? So you can kind of give an update where we're at on something. The second part is the recommendation or the consideration to once a semester, probably or 3 times a year, one in the fall semester, one in the spring, and maybe one in the summer, where a video update to all the stakeholders is sent by the head of school, given an update, just communication, where we're at on the goals this year, to focus on the celebrations, as well as maybe any challenges coming forward. We probably agree that the lack of communication and updates doesn't help, but the attempt to communicate, particularly if it's targeted, can be a great motivational piece. What's your thoughts on this step? Think about your setting. At an all-school meeting, either monthly, where it's a 5-minute little hit, or a quarterly 15-minute hit, and then 3 times a year, and we'll just say fall, spring, and summer, a little video clip on it. Again, for me, these REMOs represent the dreams and aspirations of all the stakeholders, including the accrediting body. It just seems to me that if we do follow this communication plan or some version of it, that people, our stakeholders, would see that we value their input and their dreams. What are your thoughts on that?
I think the younger our constituency gets, in terms of generationally, the more this is critical, because there was a certain amount of just inherent trust with the silent generation, baby boomers. You put a kid in a school and you trust they're taken care of. That erodes the closer to current you get. Gen Z has no patience or trust for anything. So if you want buy-in from constituency, it's critical that you show not just the vision to your institution and your stakeholders, but you also show them, like this sub-bullet point that we haven't really mentioned, that you're receiving their criticism as well and hearing it. Gen Z buys in only when they feel heard.
Yes.
Or they perceive transparency.
Right.
Yeah, and that's a good point. We think about, when we do in our school settings, we think about observations of our teachers, and we give an evaluation. I like the idea of 360 evaluations, where it's, look, okay, there's always a leader, right? And that leader has a team. But it would seem to me that the leader needs to have the feedback from the team about, here's what I need from you to do your job better, to do my job better. Here's what I like that you do. This really drives me crazy when you do this. So not only the openness to be able to, as in our setting, in a Christian school setting, is iron sharpens iron. So one man, so one woman sharpens another. But just to be able to talk about those younger generations who desperately need to feel like their voice is valued. That's a point well taken. And it would seem to me that in a established communication plan, you're giving information, but you're also having an opportunity to receive information. And perhaps the model allows for each school leader to be flexible. I'm going to send one out in the fall, I'm going to send one out in the spring, but in the summer, I'm going to get reflection back. This is looking back on our year. What were our successes? What are things you think we need to kind of continue to keep in mind, but valuing not only from our paid stakeholders, but also those who are vested. Point well taken. Absolutely. Step 5, we're moving along pretty well here. The next step, and to be transparent, I never thought about after action reviews until I got into working closely with school improvement planning at my school. I saw after action reviews as a time waster, and it wasn't until I studied it that I saw that what after action reviews actually does, it saves time in the future. You're really asking the important questions. What happened? Why did it happen? And how can it be done better? It's not an opportunity to say, okay, Dunn, you dropped the ball here, and you're a failure and a goober, and we're docking your pay. It's more like, okay, here's what happened. Here's why it happened. Maybe there's something within our system that's keeping this effective or sustained. And how can it be done better? How many of you have done after action reviews, whether it's after a big event, whether it's after end of a quarter, a semester, or a year? Because what I've learned is sometimes an after action review, another what we would call REMOS surfaces and says, you know what, we didn't think about that. that needs to be something for next year that we need to follow up with. What are your thoughts? Small little events, those can be tweaked on the fly. But something that's major, we might need to have more discussion on. Do y'all see the value in after-action reviews? My question really involves, how do we do it? How do we do that and not be so worker-intensive and just time-consuming? How can we do it? Is some who's responsible for this one event does this? Is it a team of people who was at the event or planned the event? If I'm planning an event, sometimes I see things half full and I don't focus on the half empty. And I don't know if that's just human nature, but just a 30-second thought on how can we do after-action reviews during such a busy time as schooling, running schools, running classrooms. How can we do that? Anybody have any thoughts? Sometimes I just think it's asking these questions. What happened? Why did this happen? And how can it be done better? Maybe that's all it is.
At our institution, we do this, and it's almost always written, and I feel like that's what keeps the good feedback from coming back. I really feel like, and maybe this is personality, but a roundtable discussion such as this provides more opportunities for myself to hear others' observations and then piggyback on those and go, oh yeah, I thought that too, but I saw it from this perspective.
Right.
So it just allows varying perspectives to be unearthed versus like just a simple survey or something like that. That just feels like extra work as
Yeah.
opposed to the roundtable.
One of the things that I've noticed is we have a gentleman at our school who's involved, is the director of academics. And one of the things that he has done is he sits in and does an evaluation on a teacher. And one of the questions, and it's probably not just unique to him, but it's a genius question, and it says, how do you think things went? Because for me, if that's not the definition of an after-action review, again, if we're talking about a small snippet of time where an observation was made of a presentation of managing a class. But the question of saying, what happened? What did you like? What did you dislike? And for him to be able to offer a fresh perspective on what could be done better, or did you try to consider this? Now, the whole purpose of that is to elevate the quality and the level of instruction for obviously improving learning. Taking that to a broader picture, school-wide, your point is well taken that perhaps we just need to get pockets of people looking into certain aspects and asking these questions. What happened? Did it go well? What could be done better? And again, these things need to be recorded and documented and kept. And it just seems like to me that whether it's base camp, whether it's Kambachi, the school head needs to have a storing and retrieval system. Which, if you remember early on, I told you the first reaccreditation experience I had at my school 17 years ago, it was a file about like this. There was no digital, there was nothing. That file didn't even include the accreditation standards that we had to consider. So as leaders, we really need to step up and, as it was the scripture say, equip the saints for the work of service, so the body will be built up, that we are equipping others to do this job when we're gone. We've been a responsible leader. I see your head shaking. Are we in agreement on this thought? Wonderful. Well, as we kind of close out, we kind of end up where we began, and that is with step 6, asking ourselves, are there any future considerations? are there anything that needs to be added to the REMOS list? Of course, there are gonna be these things, whether they're from after action reviews, something like the founding pastor, and founder of our school passing away. That was a major, event. COVID changed everything. What are the best laid plans 4 years from now? There are gonna be things people are saying, you know what, we really need to do this. And it's not gonna be something that anybody saw, you know what I mean, 4 years prior. And that needs to be able to move into the REMOS list. You agree that nope, it's not on our list and we're not gonna consider anything else. Well, that's probably unwise and foolish. So what needs, any future consideration? So if you will, just for a moment, consider here the self-study. Out of the self-study comes the list of REMOs. Step one is led by the core team led by the head of school, selects 3 to 5 REMOs, and we ask these series of questions. We put it through a grid. And then step 3 is we establish a game plan, action steps, we charge point people, we put timelines to it. We establish a communication plan where we give faculty monthly or quarterly, and of course the state of the school, if you will, address to all of our stakeholders by fall semester, spring semester, and even the summer. We conduct after action reviews. And then as we consider the results of those, is there anything that needs to then come back to the list of REMOs? And my suggestion and my recommendation is that a model like this can be self-perpetuating if followed, because it involves all of our stakeholders, and it's intentional. The real issue is not knowing what to do, the issue is really doing it. Final thoughts? If you want this model, feel free to email me and I will send it to you, and you can edit, adapt, fix, improve upon, destroy and remake your own. I would love to see how you improve upon it. We're all in this same mission together, but please email me, and I would love to dialogue with you as we continue to embark on ongoing school improvement. I want to thank you so much for being a part of this workshop today. If you would be so kind to fill out that reflection report, at the close of the workshop, I'll be here if you want to point out all the areas that I need to work on, or you have a question that you didn't want to, or a comment that you didn't want to raise with the group. But thank you very much. I'm respecting your time, and this workshop is at a close unless we have a final word from anybody in the group. All right. Well, thank you so much, and have a great day.